Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos a esta sesión sobre Issues Monitor. We are going to switch to English because this section will be in English because our guests normally speak English and they know very well all of this. Well, thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure having all of you here and our guests, Martin Young and Anastasia Belostotskaya. Martin Yao, Senior Director of Insight. The name represents the Insight about Issues Monitor. They are going to introduce us in Issues Monitor and in COVID-19. Thank you very much, Íñigo, for organizing this. You have all our support in this kind of events. And thank you very much to the WEC, World Energy Council, to open this, to explain to everybody here. It represents the horizontal approach of all of this and this new approach about holistic approach in the humanizing energy in the new development of COVID-19 or something we appreciate a lot. Okay, thank you very much. I will go to give the floor to Íñigo Díaz de Espada. He's going to the president of WEC Spain, and he's going to introduce all of these issues and the presentation we will have right now. Íñigo, the floor is yours.
Buenos días a todos. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to open with a few words this webinar and welcoming Martin Young, Senior Director from the Insights Department of the WEC, and Anastasia Belostotskaya, Associate Director of Scenarios and Special Projects from the WEC as well. Martin, Anastasia, thanks for giving us the opportunity to learn more about your latest reports and tools. I think they are not still so well known in Spain, which is a pity, since they are quite interesting and unique. So hopefully with this event today, we'll contribute to disseminate them very much. I want also to take the chance to congratulate you and the Council for the nice job you are doing on bringing the entire energy sector from all over the world on board the energy transition. I think that the new WEC strategy, with a strong focus on humanizing of energy and having in mind the different angles that this concept has, is really appropriate, since our future will largely depend on how society acts and behaves. Congratulations. We have divided this webinar in 3 different sections. The first session, Martin Young will present the outcomes from the 12th edition of the World Energy Issues Monitor launched by WEC in March. As some of you would know, this is the largest annual survey of its kind, which provides a unique snapshot of what keeps energy experts awake at night and busy at work in over 100 countries, including Spain, which participates very actively through the Spanish Committee and Enerclub. In an era in which the energy landscape is changing so fast, I think it's important to pay attention to many different signals of change and to distinguish key issues from noise. The World Energy Issues Monitor is quite useful in this sense, I'm sure. In the second session, Anastasia Belostotskaya will explain another interesting tool that WEC has recently developed in order to analyze the implications that COVID-19 is having in the energy sector and the current attitudes and trends observed across the industry. It's also based on the results of a series of questionnaires that began in March 2020. These were used for the preparation of COVID post-crisis scenarios, which were presented during the last annual event of our committee in October. After these 2 first sessions, there will be a bit of time for question and answers from the audience. You can send them through your queries through the Zoom Q&A tool in English or Spanish, and Ana Padilla, Secretary General of the committee, will put the questions together and address them to Martin and Anastasia after their interventions. And at the end, we have also prepared a 3rd session moderated by Ana and consisting of a brief debate with some of our committee members around the WEC tools and the main issues of the energy agenda. This last session is going to be in Spanish. Thanks to all of you, Arcadio, Martin, Anastasia, Ana, committee members, attendees, for being with us today. Hope you find the event very interesting. Without further delay, I would like to introduce very briefly you to Martin Young. Prior to the appointment as Senior Director of Business Insight and Scenarios, Martin served as Director of Policy and Risk, leading the work of the Council's Community on the Energy Trilemma and Dynamic Risk. Martin joined the Council in August 2017 after spending 5 years at the International Energy Agency, where he led the Emergency Policy Division. He previously worked for the UK government in various departments, focusing on energy after becoming responsible for the UK's oil and gas statistics in 2002. Martin, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Íñigo, thank you for that very warm welcome. And thank you everyone for listening and having this. It's great for the Council to have this opportunity to present two of our new recent results from the Insights tools. We have some slides here that Anastasia is sharing. And if we move on to the first slide, Íñigo, you've already said how we're going to quickly do this. I will talk through the issues monitor, then I'll pass to Anastasia to talk through our COVID scenario, and then we'll have the Q&A. So if we move on, just a little bit of context. The Council began almost 100 years ago, after the First World War and after the first global flu pandemic. We've always been a practical, focused organisation, community. So if we move on to the next slide. In the last few years, we've been very much focused on the 3Ds of decarbonisation, decentralisation and digitalisation. And at the Congress in 2019, a fourth D appeared from the conversations: disruption by demand. Very much the focus now we need is to think much more about how the demand implications, and that has given rise to our new agenda of humanising energy, which I think is also a really practical area for our community to look at further. Next slide, please. Just a very quick overview of our transitions toolkit. We look at past, present and future, the past with the energy trilemma, the present with the issues monitor, and the future with our scenarios. And we have the ability to go in depth with our innovation insights area. Today, we're going to be looking at the present and the future with the issues monitor and the scenarios COVID work. Move on to the next slide. So, the issues monitor, as Íñigo has already highlighted, it's our annual horizon scanning tool. We survey energy leaders, tracking 25 issues on their evolution across uncertainty and impact. We launched the latest 2021 edition of the Issues Monitor in March. We had 2,500 responses across 108 countries that together almost represent 4/5 of global energy consumption. Of the 2,500 responses, over 1,000 were senior management or higher. So really powerful view of the energy world from energy leaders. And we have 60 country maps. This is where the countries have a minimum response of 25 responses. So we've got really good global footprint from all the tools, from all the issue monitor responses. So if we move on to the next slide. Now the issues monitor map tries to split the issues into the two groups. So in the orange box, we have the critical uncertainties that we know. We call those issues that keep energy leaders awake at night. Now these are issues of high uncertainty and high impact. So they're at the top right-hand corner of our issues monitor map. The blue box are the action priorities, still high impact, but lower uncertainty. So these are the issues that energy leaders are focusing on in their day job. If we move to the next slide, we'll now go through the critical uncertainties and the action priorities. Now, clearly the pandemic has had a major impact on what energy leaders are thinking about, what's keeping them awake. Economic trends is the most extreme critical uncertainty, but it's closely linked to the investor environment. And it's really about the economic uncertainties that the pandemic has brought out. Not only the short-term economic challenges, but the longer-term challenges and the implications it has for energy transition. The investor environment, it's how are we going to ensure that we can still get the investment that's needed? Also, there's uncertainty about what to invest and where it can be invested. So there's also links to some of the action priorities that we'll come across. Energy supply is a critical uncertainty. The lights have been kept on, but there are concerns about demand destruction and whether demand might change more fundamentally. This is particularly a concern for the energy producers, the traditional oil producing countries. Cybersecurity has come up as a critical uncertainty, and I think with the Colonial Pipeline disruption, it's actually quite timely to see this now. Remote working has lessened the impact of the pandemic, but at the same time, it's opened up a bigger risk space. And the disruption to Colonial Pipeline with the ransomware is a clear illustration of that. And finally, we have carbon abatement, which is a new critical uncertainty, and it's quite topical with COP26 being later this year. Also, you'll see that there's a number of, we've only highlighted the top 5 critical uncertainties, but there's a number of others that are closely located. So we have climate adaptation, innovative transport, and geopolitics. If we move on to the next slide and to the action priorities. The top 2 of renewables and energy efficiency are long-standing action priorities. If I were to produce a time series, not sure we've done it for this slide, but you can actually see over the last 12 years, they are there pretty as constants as action priorities across all regions. The COVID context has highlighted 2 that I pull out immediately: the affordability aspect and the support mechanisms. Support mechanisms for the short-term response, how do we recover better? And maybe also for the longer term, the post-COVID recovery, looking at things like the feed-in tariffs, etc. For the affordability, the pandemic has exposed some, or re-exposed, should we say, some deep-standing, deep-rooted societal issues about cost and access. And there now seems to be more of an appetite to try and address some of those concerns. The demographic patterns, I think, are particularly interesting because we can split this into 2 different groups. In Europe, and maybe in much of the developed world, there's possibly more of a concern about aging populations and whether demand destruction is going to continue, how's that going to be managed. But in the developing world, and particularly the rapidly urbanizing world, there's a concern about how they're going to actually get their supply in. So the demographic patterns are an interesting action priority. If we move on to the next slide, please. Just going to say very briefly that this slide just tries to quickly illustrate across, we group the 25 issues into a number of groupings, and across all of the categories, we've seen uncertainty rise in the last year because of the pandemic. Though I should highlight there are still quite significant regional differences, and we'll come on to that shortly. Next slide, please. Hydrogen is a very topical issue, and why I wanted to highlight this slide was because we are beginning to think that hydrogen, which had traditionally always been seen as being 20 years in the future, that's shifted. We now have a number of countries that have got hydrogen strategies. Spain has obviously recently released its strategy. And this issues map was trying to differentiate between those countries with the orange and blue dots, which are beginning to start looking at having strategies, or actually have them in Spain and Japan's case, comparing to those which haven't. So we still have, they're very mixed views. We are seeing a number that do have active strategies, can see use for hydrogen and are planning, and yet we also see a number on the left-hand side that don't really see how they can use hydrogen yet. If we move on to the next slide. This is where I think the issues monitor really comes into its own, because in this analysis, just looking at the critical top 5 issues by region and comparing them across the 6 of the Council's regions, we can see some interesting themes. So the economic trends is a common critical uncertainty across all regions. We have a number of other issues which occur frequently. So energy supply within Asia, Africa, in Latin America, and also Europe. Carbon abatement being seen in Asia, Europe, North America. But then we've got a number of unique issues. So Africa has the affordability as very much a focus, and its geographic patterns. Asia is looking very much more at energy storage innovation. Latin America has market design as a critical uncertainty, but also trade and investment policies that you could possibly also link to the economic trends. The Middle East region has got the Internet of Things, big data and AI, so it's very much a strong push on digitization, while at the same time also having that cyber security risk. And North America has climate adaptation and geopolitics. I should say that for North America, that geopolitics, we could say, is a Trump effect, because that is clearly one of the critical uncertainties. If Trump were to get in, that would have been a significant shift in energy policy. With Biden, we're now maybe reverting back to potential normality. I leave that one as a hanging question, we'll see. If we move on to the action priorities across the different regions. As I highlighted before, renewable energies and energy efficiency are long-standing, and they're across all regions. Here we see very much highlighting differences between the regions and their differing context. We've got fewer frequently occurring issues, so big data and AI and support mechanisms. And then we have the regionally unique issues. So investor environment and energy storage innovation in Africa. Contrast that to energy storage innovation as being critical uncertainty in Asia. Innovative transport in Asia. Market design in Europe, contrasting with that being a critical uncertainty for Latin America. For the MEGs, we've got affordability and geopolitics. And for North America, we interestingly have land and water availability and urban design. If we move on to the next slide, I'm sure that you'll be discussing this in a lot more detail, but I thought it'd be interesting just to show you very briefly the Spanish issues map with the European issues map. The couple of bits that I would highlight particularly is, while energy trends is clearly up in the top right-hand corner for both, hydrogen shifts very much from Europe to Spain, seen much more as having a higher impact. And also, interestingly, on the action priorities, renewable energies, clearly an action priority. But energy efficiency, not so closely linked. Interesting contrast. Finally, before I pass over to Anastasia, if we move on to the next slide, just to highlight very simply a comparison between the global critical uncertainties, Europe and Spain, and also action priorities. So the top 5 critical uncertainties for the globe and Europe are same. 3 of those are the same for Spain, with economic trends, carbon abatement, energy supply, but there is difference for 2 of them. So hydrogen and energy storage innovation are critical uncertainties for Spain, so reflecting your local context. On the action priorities, we have 3 across Europe, Spain and the globe of renewable energies, energy efficiency and support mechanisms. Spain shares in common the big data and AI action priority, but then there's a shift between Europe seeing market design, and Spain looking at smart grids and blockchain. So with those thoughts, I pass you over to the capable hands of Anastasia, who's going to talk you through our COVID work. Anastasia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So building on Martin's presentation on Issues Monitor, we'll talk a little bit more on COVID impact and expectations to recovery and share insights from our ongoing COVID global surveys that we're conducting at the World Energy Council. So while Issues Monitor provides an annual review of leadership perspective, as Martin mentioned, our COVID surveys provides a quick pulse of the current attitudes and trends felt across the industry. So the COVID has certainly been a pivotal moment to all societies, and crisis is a shock on already stressed energy systems. And even before, we already had signals of sluggish economic growth, climate change momentum, and increasing issues of social energy agenda. And it has also provided a glimpse of the clean energy futures that are still to come, and shown that individual actions have a global impact. And then COVID-19 also reminded us all of the importance of energy in our lives. And it's obvious today that recovery is not easy, and even with the vaccine, as we see from what's happening today in the world. And the new pandemic context, post-pandemic context of economic uncertainty has triggered the rise of new affordability and social justice concerns across all geographies. So there is the added challenge to extend energy system resilience to people and supply chains if we hope to fully recover from crisis. And as we saw from the Issues Monitor survey, Europe has its own way for recovery shaped by multiple energy issues and uncertainties. So at the comment, as we've done for nearly 100 years, our members across nearly 90 countries have been sharing their experiences across the world on actions and outlooks and through this crisis. And to help leaders with the essential job of recovery, we developed a set of 4 World Energy COVID scenarios to 2024, which are called Rewind, Pause, Fast Forwards, and Re-Records. And we used the scenarios to build the first World Energy Transition Radar, which basically decodes real-time signals from across the world on what's the recovery plans and transformations are happening today. And we also designed the qualitative scenarios-based role-play live simulations to simulate actions of diverse stakeholders and see what future their collective actions might bring us to. And today, as mentioned, I will present some results of the COVID survey. This is the 3rd survey that I'm going to be talking about in a series that we started last year in March in response to the COVID pandemic. And the survey is based on more than 220 responses that we received globally from different sectors, both within energy and beyond energy sector. So one of the things that we asked in all our surveys in last year and this year as well, and tracks the change in perspective, is the expectations on return to normal. On a global level, almost half of energy community now expects a new normal. This is 3 times more than was in April 2020 when we did the first cuts of the COVID impact across our community. And this is in line with European perspective. On the left side hand, you can see the differences and contrasts across the different regions. In Europe, less people today expect to come back to business as usual, and they anticipate the need to adjust to new reality as we recover from crisis, whatever this reality will be. We also looked specifically on the energy demand perspectives, and the COVID had significantly disrupted energy demands in many countries, and as the world starts to recover from crisis, the aggregated 65% respondents anticipate a shift or growth in energy demand in a post-pandemic world. In Europe, more expectations are about the demand shifts, but also some see a return to pre-pandemic, pre-COVID time as lockdown begins to lift across the region. We also see that crisis has created new solution spaces. Nearly half of respondents believe that new and shifting energy demands is an important emerging opportunity to tap into. And for Europe, it's also a carbon removal technologies and energy digital nexus driven by shift to working from home modes. And energy companies are moving beyond business as usual actions and reallocating investments, and more than half of organizations today are directing an increasing amount of their funds to the digitalization of their businesses, focusing on enhancing remote communication and new services. And these trends are reflected in the issues monitor that Martin presented earlier, which highlights both carbon abatement technologies and cybersecurity risks associated with increasing digitalization are among critical uncertainties. So when we talk about the diverse pathways to recovery, in general, we see that there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to recovery and energy transition. And regions are taking very different approaches, which reflect geographical diversity, different starting points and circumstances. The impact of COVID is quite uneven. Some countries are seeing a slowdown of energy transition due to the COVID, while half of our global community indicate that COVID's recovery actions actually contributed to accelerating energy transition. There are many net zero promises and actions across different countries and companies emerging during this COVID time. And in Europe, views are quite optimistic. 56% indicates a positive impact of transition on energy transition from the COVID, and almost the same things that the crisis can be turned into opportunity for transformation. So this is the right time to actually think about more ambitious agendas. And this trend on transformation is also reflected in our World Energy Transition Radar, and the regional radar snapshots reveal signals of different patterns to recovery, reflecting different starting points and circumstances, as I mentioned. And it shows different level of ambition across countries. So there are some that see transformation, that look for transformation, or some that return to pre-pandemic agenda, and the different level of collaboration and trust. The countries are collaborating with each other and trust each other and their recoveries, or are relying on resources mainly. For Europe, there are many signals of the green and more inclusive recovery, which is done in a more collaborative way than in some other parts of the world. And this is in line with the global trends where the signals of high transformative worlds, fast forwards and rare record futures starts to emerge and dominate. So there are many barriers to energy transition when we asked our global community, and the insufficient behavioral changes is mentioned as the biggest barrier for energy transition, as well as the lack of government incentives and clearly defined energy policies. The majority also see that the government playing a major role in recovery and energy transition. However, lots of respondents recognize that responsibilities for COVID recovery are distributed across business, civil societies, and investors. There's also a growing need to engage across energy sector boundaries and work with new energy players like digital giants, and aggregators, and entrepreneurs, and involve different parts of the society. So the critical role in energy transition is seen on consumers. While we all know it's important to set targets and timelines and coordinate top-down or high-level road mapping, more people literally need to get involved in progressing multiple pathways to more consumer-centric energy futures. And there is a clear big gap between what consumers are doing and what consumers need to be doing to drive transition forwards. And on the global level, the average score of the current role versus desired role in a scale from 1, where is the minimum engagements, and the 5, where is the maximum engagements, is 2.5 out of 5, and 4 versus 4 out of 5. Europe is similar, however, slightly less gap, which is definitely shows that there is a bit more attention in engaging consumers in driving energy transition. And this shows that the pace of transition is not determined purely by the accelerated rate of technological innovation as it's seen in many countries, but actually by the ability of people engage in energy transition and make their informed choices. And closing this gap will not be easy, obviously, to enable a greater role of consumers in energy systems. Information, education, and behavioral changes are seen and mentioned by our community as the most promising approaches that we need to adopt to better engage consumers in their recovery and again, to promote the energy transition. So recognizing this gap, the Council is focusing on humanizing energy agenda, as Martin mentioned at the beginning, in this new area of people for energy for people and planets. And this highlights that the world will need many and more diverse, clean and net zero carbon energy solutions and investment opportunities, where collaboration also extends beyond experiments and global energy firms to engage new policy shapers and in other sectors and more diverse segments of societies. And as we moved into this World 2021, we focused on 3 priorities. First is the setting a human pace by addressing an affordability and energy just matters and engaging with pool of people and behaviors and energy and involving those impacted by transition. Recovery along different and diverse pathways and by building in resilience with greater emphasis on the soft shifting capabilities, including behavioral diversity in skills and energy literacy, and building forward together, which is about resetting market design for the shift to consumer-centric energy features. So at the World Energy Council, we really believe that the world needs a new narrative on humanizing energy for people and planet, so that no one is left behind. And this is the theme for St. Petersburg World Energy Congress, 25th World Energy Congress, that will be happening next year in October in 2022 with the theme of Energy for Humanity. And it basically takes place a year after COP26 and will provide an opportunity for us to showcase achievements on progressing humanizing energy by involving more people and societies in energy transition. So we're really looking forward to see you there. I think I'll stop here and I will pass back to Anna for an open discussion or Q&A, whatever is happening next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anastasia and Martin. Yes, we have got a few questions for you. The first, I think, is for Martin. One is about regarding the methodology, of the issues monitor. You have mentioned that WEC is doing this issues monitor for many years, and there's a question regarding if you update the issues included in the questionnaire every year, and how do you redefine the different categories, and in particular, they would like to know if the critical minerals for key clean energy are included, and if not, are you thinking about including it in the future, or which other issues will come as new for the next questionnaire? There is also a question, you said, Martin, that there is a big uncertainties for Spain regarding hydrogen and also energy storage. And there is a question asking if they could be linked with the limited energy interconnection of Spain with the rest of Europe. If you want to start with these two, Martin.
Yeah, very happy to. On the issues monitor methodology, we've been running it now 12 years. So many years, I'd like to see it a longer run. The issues, we have evolved the methodology over that period of time, but it's been an evolution so we can track back. And we did last year make some more substantive changes. And that was because the issues that we'd had over time, there'd been a bit of mission creep, should I say, where we'd gone up to 42 issues and a number of them overlapped. So what we were trying to do last year with a very effective working group was we refocused them and cut them down to 25 issues that are broader, and we can track back still to the past of it, so we can see how things have evolved still. On those new commodities, we haven't pulled them out specifically. We do have open text areas in the issues monitor, and it's something that I think we are going to have to be aware of. The commodity base that we need to look at are shifting. I did note that one of the Q&A questions was asking about the price volatility of commodities, and I was actually preparing myself to answer about that one.
Yeah.
Now, so I think that the rare earth ones are particularly interesting. They are something we need to look at into a little bit more detail. Whether they're quite ready for the issues monitor, we'll have to see. Actually, I think it also might be something that in the scenarios work as we're going forward, we'll be start asking those sort of questions. Are these the sort of things we need to be looking at? Are there particular commodities that we need to be much more aware of, for example, of cobalt and what have you, that are so important in batteries? Just before I move on to the next question, I just wanted to close off the price volatility thing, because I think it's really interesting. There is a lot of price volatility in energy markets, particularly oil and gas at the moment. I think there is a high degree of liquidity, and lots of agents, but I actually think that what's really driving it at the moment is there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly about demand destruction, within Europe, and including my own country now. We have the push for electric vehicles, that we're now going to see a number of countries saying that they're going to ban internal combustion engine vehicles from 2030, 2035. That is going to have clearly an impact on oil and gas demand. That same uncertainty is also affecting the investment. I think there has been a concern for a number of years that there hasn't been sufficient investment in the upstream. And so I think now you also get concerns about demand going forward. Clearly some of they're holding back investment. So there's the potential supply crunch. And I think all that uncertainty is actually feeding into more volatile prices. On the question about storage in Spain, I think it's a really interesting point that Spain, the connections, particularly there are electricity connections, gas pipelines, oil pipelines, there aren't. I think that clearly hydrogen, Spain has a hydrogen strategy. I think it's very interesting that because Spain could be a significant producer. Whether the interconnection to Europe is another matter. I think that moving something like hydrogen, are you going to move it as a gas or as a liquid? And I think possibly it makes more sense moving it as a liquid, as ammonia. And it'll be interesting to see how some of these things develop. There's clearly appetite for producing hydrogen in North Africa. And that can be moved to Europe as a demand centre. But there'll be ways how that's done, I think, is still unclear at the moment. I think that some of these things about the storage innovation, clearly people are beginning to think about how that could be useful to Spain in its role in transition.
Thank you, Martin. There is another question in the open chat. I don't know if you have seen it, related to cybersecurity risk and the map of North America. I don't know if you want to answer this one. Maybe it has a relation with the time when the questionnaire are complete. Can you see it? It's the person said that they're surprised that cybersecurity risk is not considered as a critical uncertainty in the North America. Will it change after the Colonial Pipeline recent event?
I think it probably will. In fact, I think in fairness to our North American friends, I think that they have been considering cybersecurity as a risk, possibly not as much as they should have done. I think that they've probably been, the geopolitics, we can't step away from that. The time that we were asking the survey last year was before the presidential election. So there was a great deal of uncertainty of what direction US energy policy would be going. And so I think probably with that, there was less of a thought on cybersecurity. But I think that the Colonial Pipeline event is a wake up. I find it personally particularly interesting because it was one of the issues that in my old role, we were highlighting that cyber security event could disrupt oil supplies. And now actually seeing it as an actual event, it's happened in the IEA's biggest country. It's a big impact, and they need to know how to manage it. And it's highlighted a particular weak point, because that pipeline is how they get the product up to the demand centers. And having their storage down in the Gulf Coast is not going to help. So they'll need to be thinking about how they address that. So I'm sure that that is going to be a higher domestic priority for the US.
Thank you, Martin. Anastasia, for you, probably you have seen the chat. There is a question about the role of that taxation play in consumers and in industry. Which are the trends in taxation in the different world regions? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, we didn't specifically track this in the COVID surveys, but we definitely see that there is a different government incentives are seen as the importance to engage consumers and an industry in the energy transition. And what we're also see that there is a greater attention more on the soft skills capabilities needed to upgrade it in terms of the energy literacy and diversity in skills and workforce. But we can definitely think about including this taxation question in the next surveys, as we're doing it quite frequently to track change in perspectives. Martin, maybe you have some views from the Issues Monitor on that as well.
I have a more general view about taxation. Many years ago, I used to work in the tax department. Energy taxes are a significant revenue raiser for governments. Energy transition is clearly, we're trying to improve efficiency. A number of the countries are obviously going to be, particularly oil and gas producers, they're going to have fewer sales. So there are concerns about what they're going to need to do to make up those revenue shortfalls. And those are going to be the sort of issues that we clearly need to look in with the scenarios work as we go forward. And also some of the things that how we think about support mechanisms and bring some of the new technologies forward.
Thank you very much to both of you. There is another question probably for the two as well. What could be the impact of the escalating tensions between China and Australia on the market, on the energy markets? Any reflection about that?
I wouldn't just reflect it as Australia. I think that we are seeing a broader reshaping of geopolitics. And I think that clearly China is the emerging new superpower. You could say that the US is the declining power. There's going to be some sort of rebalancing that's going on. So it's not just Australia, it affects us all. I think one of the things that we can also see, for example, that we can think back to something like solar panels. 10 years ago or so, Europe was a leader in solar panel production. And now China is the leader of solar panel production. In one aspect are the hydrogen strategies in Europe being seen because that's an area where Europe has a competitive advantage in the electrolyzers. But could that be something that China moves fast on? So I think there are a number of geopolitical market tensions with China that's going to cut across a number of different areas. Anastasia, do you see anything more on your aspects? Or?
No, I think that you highlighted quite rightly that there's going to be a reshape in the global order, and that's what we also see from the signals in our World Energy Transition Radar. There's definitely a reshape in that sense. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a quarter to 1, but there is one more question. If you have 1 minute more, it's regarding your traditional WEC scenarios, the long term, the famous modern jazz and Finnish symphony and hard rock. The question is if you think the COVID will have implication on these traditional scenarios of WEC, and if so, how?
That's a good question, because the scenarios that you mentioned, it's the long-term scenarios, and usually with the time horizon 40-50 years ahead, you consider some disruptions, big disruptions. So while COVID has a really great impact in the short and medium term, in the long term, it might not have that much implications. But we're now at the moment of reviewing our world energy scenarios, more gas and Finnish symphony hydro, more on focus on the consumer side and consumer side energy futures to see what's the role of consumers and the society in energy transition. So, and we also will be including some implications of the COVID. But again, as I mentioned, in a long-term time horizon, it's the less visible. Although if we look at the 2040, for example, it will definitely have a great impact as this is the decade quite critical in terms of the climate change objectives.
Thank you very much.
I would
yes.
just say that COVID might change the tune that the different scenarios are playing.
Yeah, okay, good insight. Thank you, but I don't know if Íñigo want to take the floor back to you, and we can start now with the debate with the members. So thank you very much again for your presentation. It was very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin and Anastasia, for your very interesting presentation. I think it has got a lot of information that we have to digest. It's not something that brings you 3 or 4 ideas immediately as when you see it, because every slide had lots of things to think about and to give 7 thoughts. So this will be available. And one of the things that we are very keen about is to start a debate in our local energy community about all the very interesting tools that the WEC is providing. So this is a base case for many discussions and many ideas, because in this, let's say, in this transition, is not only what happens in your local community, it's what happens in the rest of the world that really affects it. It's geopolitics, and also because environment is global. So thank you very much, and it's very useful for all of us to have such interesting tools that allow us to look a bit broader to the world, and rather our Spain, EU, that we have already know it perfectly well, but we need to look a bit wider. So thank you very much, Martin and Anastasia. And we have to congratulate you for the excellent job you are doing and all these studies that are really very interesting. Thank you. And now, Ana, we pass on to the questions and debate locally that you had prepared. Muchas gracias, Ana, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Íñigo. Pues empezamos, si os parece, la mesa. Creo que tenemos a nuestros invitados ya todos conectados. Y bueno, pues buenos días de nuevo a todos. Es un placer encargarme de introducir y de moderar esta sesión, en la que vamos a tener un breve debate con representantes de algunas de las empresas miembros del Comité Español del Consejo Mundial de la Energía. En concreto, nos acompañan Paloma Sevilla, directora general de Aelec, Ramón Bóves, jefe de estudios de Edp España, Cristina García, subdirectora de análisis industrial y fondos públicos de Endesa, Nieves Cifuentes, responsable corporativa de medio ambiente y sostenibilidad de Naturgy, y Marta Margarit, secretaria general de Sedigas. Creo que conocéis todos, así que no me voy a extender más en su currículum. Muchas gracias a los 5 por participar y por estar siempre dispuestos a colaborar con las actividades del comité, incluyendo el ISUS Monitor, proyecto en el que el CECME participa muy activamente desde hace muchos años, lo que nos permite tener una visión temporal de cómo han evolucionado en nuestro país la percepción de la incertidumbre y las acciones prioritarias, que creo que es bastante interesante ver esta evolución. El número de respuestas que tenemos cada año ronda los 60, lo que creemos que es un buen número, además es bastante diverso en cuanto a sectores y a tipo de actores, que refleja un poco lo que es el Club Español de la Energía. Martín ya nos ha hablado un poco de los resultados del mapa español y cómo compara con el global y con el europeo. Yo solo voy a repasar rápidamente para que nos sirva de base, ¿no?, al debate que tenemos ahora. Y bueno, recordar que veíamos que las incertidumbres críticas, en particular para nuestro país, son, en primer lugar, la evolución económica, consecuencia del COVID, que ha sido común para todas las regiones, como decía Martín, pero que en España ha tenido un impacto económico y social particularmente fuerte. Este hecho, sin embargo, no ha quitado o no ha restado importancia a la percepción sobre los temas de cambio climático, que siguen apareciendo este año en nuestro mapa con un papel destacado en línea con el resto de países europeos. El paquete verde y los planes de recuperación se ven en nuestra región como una oportunidad para que la recuperación económica sea verde, sea digital y con impacto social positivo. Como gran novedad esta edición, pues nos lo decía también Martín, ha aparecido en nuestro mapa el hidrógeno, que ha pasado de percibirse hace unos años con bajo impacto y poca incertidumbre a ser uno de los temas que más preocupan en nuestro país, según el ISUS. El mapa que nos ha mostrado Martín, pues veíamos cómo este asunto en nuestro país tiene un papel muy destacado en relación con otros países, lo que es bastante destacable. Otros asuntos, ¿no?, que también aparecen como incertidumbres críticas, pues también se ha comentado, es la innovación en el campo del almacenamiento energético. Y respecto a las acciones prioritarias, pues coinciden este año básicamente con las del año anterior y con el mapa europeo y global. Un año más se identifican grandes oportunidades en materia de energías renovables, de eficiencia energética y también digitalización. En particular en nuestro país destaca en este último área las redes inteligentes, y es remarcable pues también todo relacionado con los mecanismos de apoyo, el diseño de los mercados para incorporar de forma efectiva las nuevas tecnologías y los nuevos modelos de negocio. Como se ha comentado, hay una herramienta interactiva en la página web del web, que la verdad es bastante interesante porque te permite ver la evolución temporal de determinados asuntos por países, por regiones, y hacer comparaciones. Además, para cada país se puede obtener un poco la interpretación que hace de su mapa, y como hay más de 80 países, pues es interesante ver, ¿no?, para cada uno lo que ha resaltado. Y bueno, sin más dilación, pues a mí me gustaría ahora darle la palabra a la primera ponente que tenemos, que es Paloma Sevilla, directora general de Aelec. Hola Paloma, ¿qué tal? ¿Estás ahí, verdad?
Sí, Ana, hola, ¿cómo estás?
Gracias por acompañarnos. Bueno, repasamos el otro día, ¿no?, esta herramienta que me refería, ¿no?, de que puedes hacer ver la evolución de determinados asuntos a nivel temporal. Y me gustaría saber tu opinión un poco sobre cómo ves tú la evolución del campo en el campo energético de algunos de los asuntos que hoy han salido, ¿no? El almacenamiento, el concreto, las redes inteligentes, el diseño de mercados y el transporte innovador. Te daría 3 minutos como al resto y muchas gracias, Paloma.
Muchas gracias, Ana, a ti por la introducción. Efectivamente, desde el sector eléctrico vemos algunas evoluciones interesantes con respecto a determinadas preguntas. Quisiera empezar con el cambio climático, donde hemos visto que la necesidad de acción ha sido prioritaria en 2014, sin embargo, bueno, pues ahora esta necesidad de acción ha disminuido, pero lo que nosotros creemos que pasa es que ahora mismo nadie pone en duda todas las acciones, ¿no? Desde que tenemos la aprobación del paquete de energía limpia, el nuevo pacto europeo o los objetivos de descarbonización y de renovables a 2030, el camino se ha allanado, ya sabemos qué es lo que hay que hacer, ya tenemos las herramientas, incluso la regulación también ha avanzado, por lo que falta, que no es poco, es hacer esas acciones. O sea, no, eso queríamos destacarlo. Como segundo punto, y también comentado por ti y por Martín, está el almacenamiento con un protagonismo indiscutible, ¿no?, en estos años, que creemos que lo seguirá siendo, puesto que es clave para la integración de las renovables eléctricas y creemos que este aspecto va a requerir de muchos recursos por la evolución tecnológica que todavía tiene que venir. La reducción del hidrógeno, también comentado por Martín, es destacable el impulso que se le está dando tanto desde empresas como de instituciones. Creemos que el hidrógeno verde es una alternativa para avanzar en la descarbonización de determinados procesos, como algunos procesos industriales o el transporte pesado. Entonces, sin duda, para alcanzar la completa descarbonización hacen falta de soluciones innovadoras donde el hidrógeno verde jugará un rol importante. La movilidad sostenible, como cuarto punto, también comentado y preguntado por ti, creemos que es un eje de inversión y desarrollo en estos momentos, pues para alcanzar los importantes objetivos de vehículos eléctricos en la presencia en nuestras carreteras. Es una apuesta decidida, creemos que los planes de ayuda, tanto a la compra del vehículo como al desarrollo de infraestructuras, eliminan gran parte de las incertidumbres que hay al día de hoy, pero no cabe duda que la movilidad sostenible eléctrica es el vector de futuro del transporte. También comentado como quinto punto el diseño de mercado. El paquete de energía limpia ha fijado el marco, ¿no?, para avanzar en un diseño de mercado que permita la integración masiva de renovables. Y luego además también potencia el papel del consumidor con nuevos agentes y opciones para hacerlos más activos, y así se avanza hacia un diseño de mercado que responde al cambio de paradigma del sector eléctrico. Y por último, y para terminar, la digitalización. Como has comentado, hay que avanzar en este sistema eléctrico que incorpore la digitalización de las redes, que permite consolidar los cambios que requiere el sector. Las redes inteligentes van a actuar como el facilitador neutral del mercado para todo este intercambio eficiente de energía. Ana, yo creo que estoy en los 3 minutos para...
Perfecto, Paloma, te lo agradezco mucho.
Muchísimas gracias.
Tenemos en segundo lugar a Ramón Bóves, jefe de estudios de Edp España. Ramón, ¿qué tal?
Hola, Ana.
¿Qué tal? Hemos visto con la pandemia, como se ha mencionado esta mañana también, que se ha amplificado la dimensión social de la transición energética, ¿no?, destacando temas como los cambios en el comportamiento, la asequibilidad, el futuro del trabajo. ¿Crees que el concepto de transición justa ha cobrado, si cabe, en España mayor relevancia? ¿Y cuáles son los aspectos que tú destacarías y por qué? Ramón, cuando quieras.
Gracias, Ana. Bueno, la transición energética en la que estamos inmersos hacia una neutralidad climática y una economía descarbonizada puede generar, sin lugar a duda, una oportunidad que no ha tenido precedentes para construir una economía más resiliente, más sostenible y un futuro mejor. Pero sí es verdad que también que la pandemia y la consiguiente crisis económica pues ha puesto al descubierto, de manifiesto, algunas vulnerabilidades en la sociedad. La transición energética se suele analizar desde el punto de vista regulatorio, desde el punto de vista de inversiones, de tecnologías, pero quizá menos desde la dimensión social y humana. Y esta pandemia sí ha amplificado esta dimensión social en aspectos como el empleo, el teletrabajo, la movilidad, y también puede acentuar ciertas desigualdades. Y yo diría especialmente en 2 ámbitos. Por una parte, regiones que están más expuestas a la transición, como pueden ser comarcas mineras o con centrales de carbón en procesos de cierre. La apuesta por la descarbonización, por la descentralización y por la digitalización pueden ayudar a generar empleo en estas zonas y a llenar también la España vaciada, ¿no? Las regiones tienen que saber aprovechar un poco estas oportunidades, esta transición, transformándola, diría, en una estrategia industrial, ¿no?, para estas zonas. Y luego está el segundo aspecto que quería reseñar, son los consumidores más vulnerables. Se estima que casi una cuarta parte de la población vive en riesgo de pobreza o de exclusión social, y en la que cada vez hay más problemas de asequibilidad de la energía. Se deben proveer pues herramientas que puedan involucrar a los ciudadanos para que sean activos en la transición energética y estén en el centro del sistema energético. Favorecer la inclusión social a través de la participación ciudadana, la concienciación, la educación, el comportamiento del consumidor, aspectos que Anastasia antes nos comentaba en su presentación. El autoconsumo, la generación distribuida, la organización en comunidades de energía son aspectos a destacar sin lugar a duda. Para estos 2 ámbitos se requiere pues impulso, voluntad política, promover la colaboración público-privada, la coordinación de las administraciones, formación específica y utilizar adecuadamente los fondos de transición justa, así como los fondos europeos, en proyectos que sean tractores y que promuevan la creación pues, de empleo y la cohesión social. Diría para acabar que se necesita liderazgo y valores para dar respuesta solidaria y que otorguen confianza y que aseguren una transición justa en la que no haya ni ganadores ni perdedores y en la que nadie se quede atrás.
Muy bien, Ramón, ojalá nadie se quede atrás. En tercer lugar tenemos a Cristina García, su directora de Análisis Industrial y Fondos Públicos de Endesa. Buenos días, Cristina.
Hola, buenos días, Ana.
Nos explicaba Anastasia en su presentación cómo el 50% de los encuestados a nivel global considera que las acciones para la recuperación post-COVID conllevarán una aceleración de la transición energética, y en Europa ese porcentaje que mostraba era incluso mayor, el 56%. En España en particular, ¿cómo crees que la pandemia ha cambiado nuestra agenda energética? ¿Crees que la transición se va a acelerar? ¿Está nuestra agenda totalmente alineada con la europea? ¿Hay algo que nos distinga del resto de países de nuestro entorno, Cristina?
Bueno, buenos días a todos y contestando a tu pregunta, pues en mi opinión la pandemia no ha hecho que la agenda energética española cambie de rumbo. Sigue en total sintonía con la agenda energética europea. Antes de la pandemia en España ya estábamos inmersos en un cambio profundo del sector energético con importantes avances hacia la descarbonización no solo del sector sino de toda la economía. Y ejemplo de ello es, por ejemplo, la ley de cambio climático que se empezó a elaborar antes de la pandemia y que se aprobó la semana pasada, o la puesta en marcha de subastas de energía renovable. O, por ejemplo, ahora la propuesta de creación del Fondo Nacional de Sostenibilidad del Sector Eléctrico, que seguro que va a favorecer la electrificación, que a su vez es clave para la descarbonización. Sin embargo, desde mi punto de vista, la pandemia lo que ha hecho ha sido modificar la velocidad de los cambios, y con una alta probabilidad de que se aceleren en el tiempo. Hemos visto en la presentación de Anastasia que podía haber ocurrido que con la crisis por la COVID se llevara a Europa a retirarse de los compromisos climáticos y de sostenibilidad tan ambiciosos que teníamos. Pero no ha sido así. No solo se ha mantenido el compromiso europeo del Green Deal como estrategia de crecimiento, sino que también se ha aprovechado la oportunidad para poner la sostenibilidad en el centro de la política económica europea. Y me explico. Para responder a la crisis, la Unión Europea lo que ha hecho ha sido poner en marcha los fondos Next Generation y más concretamente el mecanismo de recuperación y resiliencia con nada menos que 672.500 millones de euros. Y estos fondos, a través de los planes de recuperación que han elaborado o están elaborando los países, tienen el objetivo de reactivar la economía y la creación de empleo, pero además tienen que cumplir con dos condiciones. Uno, que al menos el 37% de los fondos se deberán dedicar a la acción por el clima y a la sostenibilidad ambiental y un 20% a la transición digital, y que las inversiones se tienen que realizar entre 2021 y como máximo 2026. Es decir, que con esto se van a abordar inversiones que antes podían ser no rentables económicamente, pero que ahora con la ayuda de los fondos pueden dar lugar a la creación en España de industrias tractoras con tecnologías bajas en carbono y que a su vez creen empleo. Esto puede ser el caso del hidrógeno, como ya habéis comentado anteriormente. Y también que, de acuerdo con el plan de recuperación que ha presentado España, se van a dedicar recursos de los fondos para almacenamiento energético, el incremento de energías renovables, la aplicación de la transformación digital al sector energético, el fomento de la eficiencia energética. Y todo ello en un plazo de tiempo relativamente corto, porque las inversiones se van a ejecutar en los próximos años y lo que al final va a ser es un fuerte impulso acelerador a la transformación ecológica. Y respecto a si está en línea o no con la europea, a mí me parece que no solo está en línea, sino que tiene más ambición, si cabe, que lo que propone la Unión Europea. Y es el ejemplo también con el plan de recuperación que ha presentado España en Bruselas, del plan de recuperación, en el que España va a dedicar el 39% de las inversiones a la sostenibilidad ecológica, por encima del 37% que ya he comentado. Así que diría que sí, que la agenda energética española está en línea con la europea, pero que destaca por presentar una mayor ambición en la consecución de los objetivos climáticos y de sostenibilidad ambiental. Y creo que no me he pasado de los 3 minutos.
No, perfecto, muy bien. Es el turno ahora de Nieves Cifuentes, responsable corporativa de Medio Ambiente y Sostenibilidad de Naturgy. Buenos días, Nieves. Pasamos ahora a hablar un poco de la utilidad de estas herramientas, ¿no?, que se nos han presentado hoy. Quería saber tu punto de vista, si piensas que son útiles, ¿no?, para el diseño de estrategias empresariales, y en concreto si ves que los temas que se han mencionado esta mañana, que son prioritarios, se alinean con las prioridades de Naturgy. ¿Cómo lo veis?
Pues yo creo que esta herramienta es una herramienta muy valiosa, ¿no? Pone foco sobre cuáles van a ser los temas claves en el futuro de la energía y sobre todo yo creo que en un momento en un momento como este, que tenemos 30 años trepidantes por delante, donde vamos a tener que cambiar pues cada instalación que genere, transporte o utilice energía, ¿no? Por tanto, tener este tipo de herramientas que además lo analizan con una visión muy holística, no pensando solo en la economía y en la tecnología, sino también un poco con ese foco social, que bueno, ya Ramón nos ha comentado lo importante que es, y también con el foco ambiental, ¿no? Entonces sí, por supuesto, lo veo una herramienta muy interesante y además también nos permite un poco ver cómo va evolucionando en el tiempo, ¿no? Y esa información, pues para cualquier análisis estratégico es súper útil, ¿no? ¿Cómo de alineados están los resultados con la estrategia de Naturgy? Pues yo diría que 100% alineados, ¿no? Estamos hablando de que algunos de los temas, ¿no?, más relevantes es el cambio climático, con el cual pues tenemos un compromiso bastante importante y hechos. En 3 años hemos bajado ya un 30% nuestras emisiones directas de gases de efecto invernadero, hemos cerrado las centrales de carbón, que eran, digamos, las que más CO2 generaban. Estamos invirtiendo mucho en renovables, que era otro de los temas recurrentes que salían, y por supuesto en digitalización, en esas redes inteligentes que nos lleven a esa transición. Vemos también la relevancia del hidrógeno. El hidrógeno es relevante sobre todo por el hecho porque no va a ser suficiente con la electrificación, nos va a hacer falta algo más y ahí está el hidrógeno, por eso tenemos tantas expectativas en el hidrógeno. Ahí estamos también investigando y también trabajando muy duro con el tema del biometano, que no se habla, parece que lo damos por hecho, pero es un vector que tecnológicamente hoy en día es una realidad y en países como Francia o Alemania pues están saliendo muchísimos proyectos y va a ser un vector energético que va a cubrir parte de la demanda. Creemos que aquí en España también podríamos hacer lo mismo, todavía no lo estamos consiguiendo, pero es un área en la que estamos trabajando. Hablamos también de autoconsumo y, por supuesto, también de acuerdo con lo que comentaba Cristina, ¿no?, el efecto acelerador que van a tener los fondos Next Generation. Perdón. Creo que aquí, y yo diría, lo que más me llama la atención, o quizá lo novedoso, es lo social, ¿no? Es buscar soluciones más allá de lo tecnológico, en el sentido, uno, de que la transición tiene que ser justa y aceptada por la ciudadanía, porque si no, no va a ser, es fundamental, ahí Ramón ya ha hecho hincapié, y luego también porque este cambio de modelo es el cambio de consumidor a prosumidor, o sea, vamos a tener que cambiar nuestros comportamientos, tiene que aparecer los resultados, ¿no? Educación. Entonces, vemos que no solamente hay soluciones tecnológicas como la batería, sino que también a través de la gestión de demanda de los prosumidores, pues vamos a ser también capaces de almacenar de alguna manera energía o gestionar, ¿no?, esa demanda. Y yo creo que son temas muy interesantes y en los que tenemos que empezar a trabajar donde todavía está todo por hacer.
Muchísimas gracias, Nieves.
Gracias.
Pues terminamos ya con Marta Margarit, secretaria general de Sedigas. Buenos días, Marta.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás, Ana?
Muy bien, pues hoy hemos visto, ¿no?, en el mapa español que el hidrógeno renovable ha pasado a tener un papel protagonista, ¿no?, en nuestro país, y cuando lo comparábamos con el resto de regiones y países, pues destacaba mucho. ¿Por qué ahora y en este momento? ¿Y tú piensas que la crisis actual ha tenido que ver con este impulso o este interés?
Bueno, es cierto, la verdad que a mí también me ha sorprendido que fuera España el que más interés tenía en el hidrógeno verde cuando también la Unión Europea lo está impulsando, ¿no? Vimos en la hoja de ruta española cómo lo impulsaban desde el gobierno español y sinceramente creo que este impulso viene dado por el Green Deal y la apuesta que hace tanto Europa como España para la descarbonización completa en el 2050. Por supuesto que este nuevo vector va a impulsar el empleo y la reactivación económica. ¿no? Sin embargo, sí también creo que la primera causa del impulso es la descarbonización. Hasta ahora no es que no se usara el hidrógeno, sabemos todos que el hidrógeno se ha utilizado en algunos procesos de fabricación, pero no se utilizaba como combustible, ¿no? Sino básicamente pues, en el sector petroquímico y en la producción de fertilizantes, pero también en algunas fábricas de vidrio, algunas grasas, etcétera, etcétera. Pero ahora lo que se está viendo es el impulso que le vamos a dar para sustituir algunos combustibles fósiles en algunas aplicaciones como combustible, ¿no? Sabemos ya desde siempre cómo se produce el hidrógeno, que es un vector energético, no es un combustible, ¿no? Porque como no lo encontramos libre en la naturaleza, sino que lo tenemos que obtener a partir de la descomposición del agua, en este caso, y utilizando electricidad verde, pues obviamente no es, como decía, un combustible directo, sino que es un vector energético, ¿no? Bien, ¿qué es lo que va a fomentar este hidrógeno, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que va a impulsarlo? Pues obviamente, tal y como decían mis compañeros de mesa, todos estos, esta inversión que va a hacer o este dinero que nos van a traer desde Europa y esa... digamos, esas circunstancias, ¿no? Esas circunstancias que se están dando ahora. Es decir, queremos llegar al 2050 con una descarbonización completa, tenemos que conseguir que ese hidrógeno a gran escala sea rentable, es decir, y eso, según la Agencia Internacional, en otros papeles está diciendo que a 2030 podríamos llegar a que ese hidrógeno podría tener, ¿no?, un precio más asequible del que tiene ahora. La hoja de ruta española prevé movilizar hasta 8.900 millones de euros, mucho o gran parte de los cuales vendrán de los fondos europeos de recuperación. Hay mucho por hacer, ahí está volcado tanto el sector público como el privado. Tenemos que instalar hidrogeneras, tenemos que instalar electrolizadores, etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Con lo cual, yo sí lo que puedo decir es que el sector del gas, desde Sedigas y todos sus socios, hemos apostado por eso. Hemos formado un think tank que está estudiando todos los cambios que hay que hacer desde el punto de vista regulatorio del usuario y de las redes para que todo eso pueda conducir y utilizar el hidrógeno, porque obviamente el hidrógeno se genera en un punto, pero se va a utilizar, ¿no?, como combustible en varios puntos, con lo cual también que hay que prever esa distribución. Con lo cual, bueno, estamos todos metidos en eso, todos mirando cómo descarbonizar la economía y por nuestra parte, pues apostando al máximo. Muchas gracias, Ana.
Gracias a ti, Marta. Pues no hemos pasado un poco de tiempo, creo que ha merecido la pena y ha sido interesante, espero que para vosotros también. Yo por mi parte solo pues dar las gracias y ponerme a disposición de todo el mundo por si para cualquier cosa ligada al CECME o al WEC a través del club y darle la palabra ya a Íñigo y Arcadio por si quieren hacer alguna despedida. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Bueno, Íñigo.
Como estamos ya un poco pasados de tiempo, os daros las gracias a todos por vuestra contribución. Yo creo que todo lo que sea difundir los estudios del WEC, pues es bueno por la perspectiva global y mundial que da, aspectos que son los que estamos ahora trabajando todos en nuestro día a día. Entonces, simplemente al final, pues dar las gracias a Nieves, a Cristina, a Paloma, a Marta y a Ramón. Y gracias a todos y espero que os haya resultado útil. Arcadio.
Pues nada, buenos días a todos, que estéis muy bien. Y sí, el difundir esto, oye, ya lleva 11 años, ¿no? Ahí se ve un poco la trayectoria y yo creo que es lo más importante de estas estadísticas, ¿no?, y de este tipo de cosas. Y ya veis dónde somos diferentes, ¿no?, en el almacenamiento y en el hidrógeno. Eso me parece que es así. Vamos a ver cómo seguimos, ¿no? Bueno, pues muchas gracias a todos vosotros.
Muchas gracias.
Como siempre, un abrazo.
Buenos días. Gracias, Ana.
Gracias, un abrazo.
Gracias.
Adiós.
Gracias.